Folks hear me at the back? A couple thumbs up. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Grace Lohr. I'm the Minister of State for Childcare and the MLA for Victoria Beacon Hill. Really, really glad to have some time with you this afternoon at Camosun. We are on the territory of the Lekwungen and the WSÁNEĆ peoples. A beautiful day and really great to have some time with you. We just wrapped up a very busy session at the legislature, and now we have the opportunity to have our Premier, David Eby, here with us today, and a chance for him to share with you some of the work that we're doing on the challenges facing our communities, facing the province when it comes to housing and healthcare, some of the work that our team is doing to deliver results in our community on the South Island and beyond. As importantly, it's a chance for Premier Eby to hear from you today. We'll have a chance to ask some questions, to have a bit of a dialogue, and for him to hear from you about the challenges and about your ideas for our communities and our province. With that, I'm going to pass it over to our Premier.
Thanks. Oh. Thanks so much, Grace, and thanks for coming. I know it's a beautiful day, and thank you for the applaud. It's a beautiful day. I know you've got other options, and I'm really glad that you're joining us for this conversation. I think it's going to be great. And a special thank you to the people behind me, where they have to look alert and like pay attention the whole time. So I'm very grateful for that. And obviously, begin by recognizing we're on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people and the WSÁNEĆ people as well. Joined by a couple colleagues. Minister Mitzi Dean is out there in the audience and responsible for the Ministry of Children and Family Development, Children and Youth issues in the province. And Minister of Transportation, Rob Fleming. Just so you don't think we're trying to pass them off as regular citizens, putting their hands up and asking questions, they're here, they're part of the team, and they'll back me up if you have level 2 or above questions on those kinds of issues. So just quickly, it's a really exciting time in British Columbia. When I meet people and talk to them in communities, they're very optimistic about where we're going and what the promise is in the future of this province. And you can see it in a number of different indicators. There's more people moving here to British Columbia than in our province's history of keeping track of those kinds of things. For the last 60 years, we set a record last year, the number of people who moved here, and then we've already broken last year's record so far this year of people moving here from other provinces and from other countries around the world. And the reason why people are moving here is they see opportunity here, they see economic opportunity, they see a beautiful province, they see all that we have to offer here, which is very exciting. We also face some big challenges, with this population growth coming out of the pandemic. We've seen some major challenges that we need to address, and the best way to address them is together. Whether you look at the healthcare system, facing a lot of strain, healthcare workers having come through the pandemic, our emergency rooms, people looking for a family doctor, people needing care across the province in different ways. Whether you look at issues of homelessness, mental health, and addiction in downtown cores particularly, very visible encampments, people struggling in that way. Looking at issues of housing generally, even people earning a decent wage, trying to find a place to live that they can afford, that their families can afford, wondering what their future looks like in the province, whether they need to go somewhere else. This is a key question for the future of our province, providing that housing, making sure we're providing that. And then just generally the question of the economy in British Columbia, big shifts, really positive shifts. We have a massive and growing tech and biotech sector, both here on Vancouver Island and on the mainland. Really exciting times. I was part of an announcement yesterday with the federal government around a biotech firm called AbCellera, developing leading treatments. They are growing incredibly rapidly. But we also know that some of our more traditional industries like forestry struggling right now with the loss of just available trees through mismanagement of the forest, through forest fire, pine beetle. And so it's a very interesting time in our province with some big challenges. And one of the things that has been really remarkable to me in the short time that I've been Premier, I'm coming up on about 6 months, is how willing everybody is to pull together to address these challenges. And whether it's in healthcare or whether it's in mental health and addiction or whether it's in the economy for particular sectors, people want to work together to find solutions to these problems. And so that's part of what this is about. This is a chance for me to hear from you about what you're seeing in your communities, what your concerns are, what we should be working on. As Grace said, what the opportunities are. And I'm really excited because my whole political career and generally I believe very strongly that I'm only effective in my job if I know what's actually happening in community, what the priorities are of people so that we can deliver for people. And as I found, as I've moved through politics through different levels, including to the Premier's office, you get more and more removed from the frontline experiences of the people either delivering the services or living the experiences, because it gets translated through a whole bunch of staff sometimes, or information gets managed, whatever. So to have this frontline interaction with you, to have this frontline information from you is invaluable to me, to Grace, to Rob, to Mitzi, to our whole government. And I want to thank you because it's a service certainly to us as we try to serve you, but also to the province so that we're more effective. So thanks for coming. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Grace so that we have time to actually answer some of those questions that I say are so important. So Grace, please.
Thank you, Premier. We really have an incredible room here. I'm looking around, I see some new faces, but I also see members of our community who are doing essential work on housing, on mental health and addictions, on childcare, on healthcare, and beyond. So I know we're going to have a really good discussion here today. So I'm going to let you know who is asking the question and who's coming up next so that you can get ready and join us up over here to join us to pose your question. Up first, we have Wei Tu, and then we have Chris Beresford. So Wei Tu, you're up first. Join us up here. Yes, please. And Chris Beresford, if you can come up here so you'll be ready to come next.
Come have a seat. Sit down?
Yeah, come have a seat with us.
Thank you. My name is Wei Tu, and I'm a resident of 35 years in Victoria and Saanich. Today I came representing over 1,000 Chinese residents in Gordon Head area, in Victoria, in Langford in general. So I prepared questions because I gathered all the questions people have, was going to plan to ask you, but unfortunately I'm only allowed to ask one question. And that, Premier, since you become Premier, you have been handling live grenades in BC very well. We all witnessed. Thank you so much. And of all the questions that I'm going to ask you is that you're going to have action plan because the top priority is housing. And I think a majority of people here all consider this as our top priority. Now, the action plan would allow to have, and this is what I listened to your April 3rd meetings in Esquimalt, that 4 units would be allowed for single family lot. My question to you is this: the single family lot could vary in size, in height, in restrictions, in setbacks, all kinds of differences. How are you going to handle it? The reason I'm saying this here, the lot size could be 6,000 square feet, could be 100,000 square feet. If you say one lot, 4 units, that does not really address the housing issue. So what I'm suggesting, first of all, the 4 units per 10,000 square feet should be very doable and reasonable, number one. Number two is the height restriction as a result of old rules, regulations that has been in place for over 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. Is your new initiative or action plan going to supersede all this, I guess, these rules and bylaws? And in order to really provide a more affordable housing, that has to be done in a very, very decisive. And I guess you have this probably, may I say, the New Zealand model, which you are go further to have a 4 units per lot, which New Zealand only have a 3. I think, great job, keep going and do more decisively. That's my question. So in other words, taking into consideration of the lot size height restriction, why not?
Thanks. Thanks so much for the great question, and thanks for going first. Not an easy thing to do. So thanks for stepping up, and thanks for not asking 1,000 questions. The housing issue is so critical for British Columbians right now, and it's in big cities, and it's in small cities, it's in rural communities, it's in our most urban centers, and it's everything from people looking for a place to rent, looking for a place to get into the housing market. It's people wondering if their kids are going to have a chance to live in the communities where they grew up. All of these issues, it's employers looking for workers that can't afford to live near where they work. And this specific question about part of our overall housing plan, which is a plan that looks at housing, instead of just, government always used to focus on the housing for the poorest of the poor, the deep core social housing kind of BC housing type project. And now we're really having to look at housing and government being involved in housing for people who earn a decent income, middle income housing, looking at housing as essential infrastructure for our province to be able to grow and be successful and for people to be able to build a decent life here. And so on this specific part of a really comprehensive housing plan, the idea is pretty straightforward. The idea is right now, if you want to build a home in most cities in British Columbia, the easiest, fastest, cheapest in terms of process kind of home you can build is a single family home. And in many communities, that is a home that is not available to people at the price points that they can afford. If you want to build a duplex or a triplex, you want to build a row house, you have to hire an architect, you have to go through bylaw reviews, you have to do, for most cities, there's extensive process that you have to go through. So what ends up happening is that the cheapest, fastest, easiest process is only available for the most expensive, least accessible kind of housing. And we want to say that that more accessible types of housing should also have that similar process. And so the Ministry of Housing is working with cities about the exact process under their bylaws, with the Union of BC Municipalities, with individual municipalities, about how we make that happen, that the single-family house process is available for more affordable, more accessible types of housing as well, so that they're not tied up in full city hall hearings and that the city doesn't have to spend a lot of time and energy going through public hearings about housing that we know we desperately need in many communities across the province, that it's that simplified process applies. Because what I see in my community, what I imagine you see in many of your communities, is you see an old, and the physical building is relatively affordable, but the land is quite expensive. Older homes being torn down and replaced with another home that's a single family home, and often the older homes have a basement suite, but then in the new home there's not even a basement suite, so you're actually losing housing. And that is the exact opposite direction we need to go in the province. We need to be opening more housing and doing it in a way that understands there's lots of people who want to be in these residential-like neighborhoods. They want to be near the parks, the schools need kids, the infrastructure's all there, and the families that would use all of that can't afford to move into those neighborhoods. And so that's the problem we're really going at, and the detailed work that you're asking about is happening with the cities right now to make sure that we're addressing key questions like infrastructure and sewage and water and all these important issues we need to deal with, heights and so on. That work is underway right now. Thanks for asking that question.
Chris, come on up, and then after that we'll have Darlene.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, sorry.
Thank you. Premier, it's very nice to see you today. It's nice to see your ministers that are here today, too. I am going to ask a question about the justice system. I know that prior to coming to elective office, you sought a great deal of justice reform, and you sought the balance between public safety and civil liberties. Crime, street-level crime, and those things are a major concern to a number of people, and it's not just a social concern, it's an economic concern. My question to you is about the recent changes the federal government has proposed, particularly around bail reform, and whether you feel that those are sufficient and will help improve public safety and give us more confidence as we go downtown, walk through our streets, and deal with the issues that we have to from day to day. Are you satisfied with what the federal government is doing?
Thanks, Chris. Great question. Chris and I, just to declare, work together, sort of. Chris headed up a government agency responsible for ensuring that parents pay their child support. And if they don't, that the government makes sure that happens so that parents and kids don't live in poverty because child support's not being paid. It's incredibly important and difficult work, so thank you for doing that work. The key question about the safety of our communities and the sense, not just the physical safety, are you safe walking down the street, but just sort of the sense that you have that your community is a safe place when you go out in your downtown or wherever, things feel safe, is a critically important issue for many British Columbians right now, and certainly for me. And there are an array of issues that have resulted in the challenges we see in different communities. And there are different approaches that our government is taking to each of these different issues. So it's a very straightforward question with a slightly, and I apologize in advance, lengthy answer. So there is a cohort of repeat violent offenders, people who commit a violent offense, they're arrested by police, they're brought to court, they appear in front of a judge, and the prosecutor makes the assessment, I think this person needs to wait in jail until their trial date. They shouldn't be released back to the community because the community rightly would be concerned that this person is going to reoffend again. The judge applies the law to this person and says, you know what, considered all the facts, applied the law, and I'm going to either hold this person or I'm going to release them back into the community. The federal government made some changes. I think that were well-intentioned changes to the bail rules. The idea was to avoid having people wait in jail for trials that are not a threat to the community, and to avoid administration of justice offenses where someone's arrested for not following a bail condition. The unintended consequences, I believe, of that resulted in judges being extremely reluctant to hold people to wait for trial. So the data we have is about 50% of the time that a prosecutor asked for someone to be held in jail because they were a threat to the community, they were a threat to people's confidence in the justice system, judges made a decision applying the law to release that person back to the community. And the outcome of that is a series of stories in the news, a series of incidents affecting people and their lives, of someone who was arrested for a violent offense, released, and then committed another violent offense against someone, and some of them were particularly awful. And this wasn't just an issue in British Columbia, it's in Alberta, it's in Ontario, and some really high-profile awful incidents. And so British Columbia led the way with other premiers to go to Ottawa to ask for a change to the rules. The federal government committed to do so and recently introduced those changes. These are the ones Chris is asking me about. I think the changes are good. I think they're positive and they respond to the concerns that we have. My concern is that they won't be passed before the Parliament, the federal Parliament, stops sitting. They won't get through the Senate, so we're really encouraging all parties to work together to get this through the Parliament and to get it through the Senate, and it'll be helpful. But it won't solve this broader issue of often called street disorder, or mental health and addiction issues that people are facing in the streets and so on. And so we also have established now 12 teams across the province of prosecutors, corrections officials, probation officials working together. There's a small, relatively small number of people creating an outsized amount of chaos in communities. And this is not just violent offenses, it's also property offenses, breaking into cars, vandalism, sort of more minor kinds of offenses, but if it happens to you, it feels awful. And so to track and monitor these prolific offenders, to be able to be far more efficient in the court system so that the information is all available to the court each time, that it's not a different prosecutor every time, that the person knows who the offender is and knows what particular responses this person needs and can make compelling arguments to the court to make sure that if they are released, that there are conditions that are going to make sure that they deal with the mental health or addiction issue that's bringing them into contact, or to make sure that they're not a threat to the community. Really important work. 12 of these teams across the province that are in place right now, they started work at the beginning of May, many of them, and they'll all be underway by the end of May. And we also have $1 billion in this year's budget around mental health and addiction supports. And this is about treatment and intervention for people who should not be in our streets. They should instead be in a healthcare-like setting. It could be in complex care housing, where there's nurses and healthcare professionals in a supportive housing environment. It could be in a hospital-like setting, like the Redfish Center in Coquitlam on the old Riverview site. And so we're currently working with health authorities on bringing these additional intensive mental health and addiction supports into place for people who are in our streets right now, but who should not be, who should be in a healthcare setting to respond to whatever's ailing them around mental health and addiction. So it's a comprehensive response to what seems like a very straightforward issue, but it has required going at a number of different angles to get at it. So thanks, Chris, very much for the question.
Thank you, Premier.
And thanks for your work for British Columbians for so many years.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Next, we have Darlene, and then Dominique with a question after that.
Okay, we're good. Just gotta double check. Darlene Rochford, Victoria Labour Council, and I wrote my question out because I knew I'd forget it.
Okay.
So, one of the moves that your government has made that we heard a lot of previous concerns about was access to free contraception. We're happy to hear about the recent announcement. But due to a shortage of doctors, as well as long wait times for things like IUDs, not everyone is still able to access it. And the other side of it's the lack of funding for fertility treatments for British Columbians. So my question is, what is your government doing to ensure that people can access the essential medication for contraception and fertility treatments for people who want and or need it?
Thanks. That's a great question. And this is one of those announcements that was in the budget that just really punched through for so many people. They really heard about the free contraception for British Columbians. If there was one item, and there were so many pieces in the budget that I was really excited about, but if there was one thing that people disproportionately came up to me and said, you know, we're so glad the government is doing this, it was free contraception. And I meet regularly with premiers across Canada, and it's generated a lot of interest across Canada. So the campaign for free contraception generally is not exclusive to BC, it's across Canada. And I believe that we'll see other premiers adopting it because it was just so well received by everybody. The questions of access are critically important, and I believe it's in June that we'll be launching, Minister Dix, the health minister, will be launching with pharmacists, the ability for pharmacists to prescribe contraception directly. We know that people are having trouble accessing family doctors. We know they're having trouble accessing nurse practitioners and others who can prescribe. And so providing this additional venue, and it's not just contraception, it'll be minor ailments as well. But being able to go to a pharmacist who can prescribe and also fill the prescription potentially, or if it's an IUD, provide a referral to a clinic to be able to do that. Is going to be, we hope, part of the way that we bridge that gap so that everyone gets to access this. My wife's a family doctor, and so when this announcement was made, she used to be a nurse that was focused on sexual health in her practice. And she said the number of times I met with, in particular, young women who came, and I recommended particular birth control to them, and they said to me, that sounds great, but I can't afford it. What's cheaper? Was just heartbreaking. And so that will be transformative for many, many people in our province. The second piece is a really important one as well. You know, there are lots of people who struggle with infertility. It's a very personal thing for people. They don't often want to go out and talk about it publicly and campaign on it. You know, we're our family's struggling with this. And so it's something that doesn't go talked about as often as it should in public, that this is part of what government should be looking at in terms of services available to people. We do offer some services related to fertility in the province, and I'm certainly aware of proposals around expanding availability of IVF. Some provinces do offer that, and I can tell you the Ministry of Health is doing some policy work on that. So thanks for your advocacy on this, and thanks for your interest in it. And it's a really good news piece that came out of the budget, and as always, more work to do. Thanks.
Next, we've got Dominique, and then David, there's a few folks who asked me to ask questions, so I'll turn to those next.
Hi, Premier Abby. Nice to see you here. I also have my question on my phone, so I don't forget any pieces. My name is Dominique Jacobs, and I am here representing the Beacon Community Services, which is a 50-year-old nonprofit in the South Island and Gulf Islands. We work to address many social issues, all of which you've mentioned today, including healthcare, homelessness prevention, childcare, affordable childcare, assisted living, senior services, and the list goes on. We also do a lot of subsidized housing as well. So my question is about actually subsidized housing. As you mentioned, everything in the province, the costs are just soaring. And for people like myself, I am a working single parent, and I also live paycheck to paycheck, even though I earn pretty well. So struggling with affordability in all areas, including housing, we're seeing people like seniors and folks on fixed incomes being displaced, not able to afford market rent anymore, forced to live in their cars. And so my question to you is, what is in your plan to address affordable housing and increase places of subsidized housing, and looking at also the soaring cost of market rent? How would you be addressing that?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. This is my second town hall as Premier, and the first one was really focused on housing issues. And I met a woman who was a pillar of her community. You know, she worked at the local school, was still working. She's a senior. She volunteered. She'd been involved in all kinds of community organizations. And she'd always rented, and she had recently gotten notice from her landlord that she was going to be evicted for landlord use. And she started looking for another place to rent, and she couldn't find a place that she could afford. And she was like, I really can't believe this is happening to me. I mean, I read about it, you know, I'm aware there's a housing issue, and I just never thought that I would be a person facing that kind of situation. And so, you know, when I say that housing is critically important, we're gonna have to take big steps, and we're gonna have to do things like allowing the simplified process for more units on a lot, and we're gonna have to set targets for municipalities around making sure they're building the kind of housing we need. And we're going to have to simplify provincial permitting processes, and we're going to have to do all that. This is informing all of that work, and specifically for people who are falling out the bottom of the market. And what we see is people that earn a decent income are kind of going, well, you know, we used to try to live in a place like this, but we're going to try to live in a place like this. That's a step down, and everyone's going a step down, a step down, a step down, and then people are falling out the bottom of the market. And so our housing strategy really looks at no one group in isolation, trying to provide that additional housing for people that can afford potentially to get into the market, can afford potentially market rentals, but also providing that more affordable housing for groups like seniors and people who are going to struggle on a fixed income. We have SAFER grants that we've expanded access to, which provide additional money to seniors so that they can be able to access market rents. We flatlined rent increases. It was not during the pandemic, and then kept rent increases below the rate of inflation, which was a difficult decision because people who offer their places to rent as a landlord, a basement suite or something else, are saying our costs are going up too, and you're keeping rents flat. But we know how much pressure that certain groups are under and facing homelessness at this time. And beyond that, we have significant additional money in our budget. Our combined housing budget initiatives are about $1 billion that go to building more housing that's just directly affordable housing for seniors and other vulnerable groups across the province. And then finally, and we'll have more to say about this down the road, but we're also, we've done an inventory of publicly owned land. And that's been underway, and we've been working with municipalities to identify land owned by municipalities and First Nations for us to build housing where we're able to control the land cost and have the cost of the building itself be what the rent covers or what the payments cover, because it could be rent to own, where the government is partnering with the private sector potentially to directly build housing on public land in order for people to be able to rent or purchase it. We're looking at literally every possible opportunity. I'm going to, among other places, Japan, Korea, and Singapore. These are very land-constrained, high-population countries, And Singapore in particular has done a remarkable job of this kind of work of government in partnership with private sector and directly building housing for people who are Singapore citizens that ordinarily wouldn't be living in what we would think of as social housing, but it's government-built housing. And so it used to happen in the 70s, co-ops, other kinds of rental housing that were built through government subsidies, and so we're having to do that. It's been a long time since government's done that, and it shows. And so we're taking that on. So we have short-term with the rent supplements, we have longer-term with the build-outs, and then intermediate-term with the social housing projects that have been proposed that we're funding more of those that are in front of BC Housing. So lots of work underway. And thanks for doing that work. I haven't met with your group. I'd love to come tour sometime.
Sorry, I would love to invite you to meet with us further. We are looking to open a complex care clinic to relieve the pressure on the Saanich Peninsula Hospital, and that's been sort of bundled with a lot of red tape from the province. So we'd love to sit down with you further.
I refuse to believe that. I refuse to believe that.
Thank you, Premier.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dominique. So a couple of people checked the box that they'd like the moderator to ask the question on their behalf. So I've got two for you. The first reads, an increasing number of reports, including from the IPCC, indicate that no further expansion of fossil fuel extraction is compatible with climate goals. What further steps will you take to ensure that no further expansion of LNG extraction occurs?
Thanks. So this is a really good question because, you know, I feel like, and maybe it's just because I live here, but I feel like British Columbia has faced a disproportionate share of climate-related emergencies. We had the wildfire season. Very early on, the pine beetle being able to overwinter, decimating our forests. We had the heat dome. We had this May with just like already record-setting temperatures. And I know that's hard to say looking at what Alberta has just gone through and with their forest fires. But I feel like we're, and it feels like down the West Coast, you know, Seattle, Oregon, California are seeing disproportionate impacts from climate change. And I think that's part of why British Columbians are generally concerned about this issue and interested in wanting government to continue to take action on this. I'm going to take a step back. We have a broad climate strategy for the province with commitments to hit certain targets around carbon pollution reduction, and it's from all sectors, including oil and gas. And we've made that commitment to British Columbians in legislation, report backs about how we're doing on reducing emissions, and we have a comprehensive set of programs around everything from agricultural to waste management, industries like concrete. I was at the Lafarge plant the other day about, they're doing some carbon capture work there that's very cutting edge, really neat stuff, and a whole array of industries, and that work's critically important. But there was one area that, in particular, people who are very engaged in this and who believe that we don't have to choose between economic development and being climate responsible, say, was missing in our climate plan. And that was a cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector. So we have committed to working with the sector to implement a legislated and regulatory cap on oil and gas emissions from the sector that is consistent with our commitments to British Columbians around our climate targets. We are going to hit those targets. And some of that work will be through electrification of our province and fuel switching. We have a new task force with BC Hydro to make sure that we're building out the clean electricity system across the province so that every industry, from mining to agriculture to forestry and others, have access to clean electricity to reduce their emissions, transportation, our ports, you name it. Because currently it takes 8 to 10 years to build out new transmission lines for BC Hydro, and that's way too long. We also are working and delivering on transitioning and making sure that we're building out the clean energy infrastructure of the future in the clean energy industry. So part of this trade mission that I'm going on to Japan and Korea and Singapore is about their very significant interest in hydrogen from British Columbia, because Ballard Power Cells is a company that builds fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells, started in Burnaby. We happen to be a place where there's a cluster of hydrogen-related businesses, and we have a very early lead in the hydrogen sector. And people generally around the world are looking to hydrogen as a way to get to carbon zero, get to net zero by 2050. And we think that with our clean electricity, with our hydrogen cluster, that we will be on the cutting edge of this. And so 2 years ago, our government put in place a hydrogen strategy We've seen, I think there's 16 different proposals now for hydrogen production in British Columbia. Some very far down the road, some very close to development, and incredibly credible, which is very exciting. And mostly about exporting hydrogen from British Columbia to Asia to help them decarbonize their infrastructure, and also for us here in British Columbia for those really hard to decarbonize industries. All of which is to say, we are in process of hitting our carbon targets for British Columbia, and we're also doing what we can to support Washington State and Alberta through electricity that we can generate here to help them reduce their emissions. Asia through hydrogen export. We're going to be building those relationships over the next week when I leave on Saturday with our team, focusing on that area. And in the interim, LNG is part of our economy here in British Columbia. It's part of how we're paying for some of this work. It's part of Japan's plan to avoid using more coal than they have to, but we know it's not the future. And so we're putting strict caps in. We're requiring the industry to be innovative in how they do that and reducing carbon pollution. We entered into an agreement with the Treaty 8 First Nations in the Northeast, where industry has to minimize the land disturbance and restore land that was used for fracking previously, and make sure that that work is done, and really a breakthrough treaty. So we're turning that corner as a province, and we're doing that work. It's critically important to me, to my family, and I know to so many British Columbians.
Thanks, David. And that was a question from Judy, and I now have one from Tim. With minimum wage being pegged to inflation, do you feel that the size may already add to the further inflationary pressure on small business?
So there's some really good news about the economy in British Columbia. And I know that it may not be front of mind for everyone because in terms of just what's generally happening at a province-wide level with our economy, because sort of day to day, you just kind of go through your life. But it's important for you to know that we're leading the way among big provinces around new business formation, that our unemployment rate is near historic lows for the province of British Columbia, that our trade exports were up 20% over last year's, and trade has almost doubled since we formed government 5 years ago, even through the pandemic period. We added 20,000 jobs this year already, and the fiscal year has just started. It is a remarkable time of economic success for British Columbia, and despite that high-level economic success, every indicator you would look to say, how's the province doing economically? I think for a lot of British Columbians in their daily lives, they're like, wow, groceries are so expensive, and rent is so expensive, and like the economy, there's something wrong here because there's a disconnect between, there seem to be lots of jobs, but all the costs that I'm facing in my daily life are really going up. And so that is a big challenge, but it's also an interesting thing that's happening in the economy. There are sectors that are really struggling, and there are sectors that are just wildly successful. So we talked a little bit about forestry and the forestry sector and the challenges that are facing that industry around just the availability of trees, as well as now, unfortunately, historically low timber prices and pulp prices. Kind of a perfect storm for that industry, but there's also a lot of small businesses. Some of them are the ones you would think of, like a downtown or a plate glass window, like a little store, restaurant, that kind of thing in your community. And others are maybe like a small manufacturing firm, this kind of thing, facing a lot of pressure. Especially going through the pandemic, a lot of businesses took out loans from the federal government to make it through the pandemic. Those loans are now coming due, or they extended lines of credit and they took on debt to be able to survive the pandemic, and now it's really a reckoning. So we've had to do things like, additional funds to support music festivals because their costs are going up and they shut down during the pandemic, and we'd lose all our festivals across the province if we didn't act. And during the pandemic, we provided record support nationally compared with other provinces for our businesses so they can make it through. And we're going to keep doing that support. It's going to be very targeted. So targeted supports for the forestry sector, targeted supports for the businesses that are really struggling in different ways. But one thing that we will not do is we won't ask the people who are earning the least in the province to pay for this issue for everybody else. We don't want people who are working to be going to food banks. We don't want people who are working to be in home. But in this province, we're not going to make the lowest paid workers pay for it.
Next, we have Emily, and then after that, Greg Hind. You can head over that way.
Maybe it's me. Oh, there we go. It probably was me. I'm Emily Golick from the Early Childhood Educators of BC. And so interesting that this is such diverse topics, and it just reminds me that all things begin with how society views its children and the importance of supporting children holistically. And I've been an early childhood educator myself for over 30 years. And in 2018 was probably one of the joyous experiences ever when the BC government decided to move forward with building a childcare system, Childcare BC. So dozens and dozens of initiatives have been developed through that plan and created by government, and now with the commitment of the federal government, we continue to move forward. However, within my organization, we're hearing from educators from across the province that these initiatives moving into a system are taking far too long. It's been 5 years, and we still don't have a childcare system in BC. And so they're worried that any gains that have been made in the last 5 years might be lost in the future. So once really BC was the leader with the 10-a-day system in Canada, and I know that because I've gone all over Canada and everybody's looking to us to see what are you doing and how are we doing. And now we are falling noticeably behind, including strategies like having a wage grid in this province for early childhood educators. Can you tell us what strategies, plans, and timelines are being developed to move into a new public system?
Thanks, Emily, and thanks for your work. You know, so we have a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old at home, and our family would not function without childcare, and so grateful to those workers who have that remarkable relationship with our kids, and really appreciative of people who take on that incredibly challenging and important job. Thank you. I'm going to give super high level, but I happen to be sitting beside Minister Grace Lohr, who is responsible for childcare, who will get into the level 2 and above on your question, wage grid and so on. Big picture, we've taken childcare and our childcare initiatives and moved them into the Ministry of Education and set up legislation around school boards and requirements around engaging on the issue of childcare because that's where we're going. Because childcare is so crazy that it's not part of integrated with our school system. You know, here we have buildings that are built for children, and this is where the parents are dropping the kids off, and they're in all of the communities. And you know, when I started in government, you know, I had parents come and say, like, there are all these rules that prevent the physical school building from being used for before and after school. And, you know, because apparently it changes from being safe for kids at 3 o'clock to being unsafe for them by 4 o'clock. And that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So what you're seeing us do is move childcare from the standalone, you know, there's a sort of a, like, if you can provide it, that's great, and if you can, that's great, and we'll have a few public ones and whatever, to moving to integrating it with the school system. Not to take away anything from anyone that's having childcare that works for them, but for our public dollars that we're directing them into integrating it with the education system broadly so that it all works as a harmonized whole for parents. Now, that's the 1,000-foot view, but I'll turn over to Grace for the, like, into the weeds, because this is what you live and breathe, right?
Yeah, you know, we are often talking about childcare spaces and expanding childcare spaces, but there is no such thing as a childcare space. There are educators, the educators who provide that care and connection. Over the last 5 years, we've decreased the average cost per day in the province from $53 a day to, on average, $21 a day, and that's huge. We've also invested in new spaces, buildings, the infrastructure. Part of what's happened is because more families can make that math work, because they were staying out of the workforce, because they were not pursuing education, because they were piecing it together in, you know, bits and with one family member and another and making it work, we're now seeing more demand for childcare because the math works. Works for families, works for kids. And that has put an incredible amount of pressure on early childhood educators and our need for more and our need to support those that are in the sector to lift them up. Expanding post-secondary seats for education opportunities for ECEs, bursaries, opportunities, diverse opportunities to pursue an ECE career. And we need to lift up those who are already in the sector. The wage enhancement has helped us raise those median wages significantly at $4 an hour, and there are more many more ECEs receiving that wage enhancement now than when it was $1 an hour. And the cost of living is going up. Our need for these educators who teach our littlest at a time when their brain is growing, and they're becoming little people, right? They're becoming human beings. So we're undertaking work around a wage grid, work that is complex because of the diverse sector that is childcare, from in-school childcare to small family home providers to big organizations like the Y. And I see many of our childcare partners here today. And in the interim, while we do that work, we know the sector needs to be lifted up. So looking at additional opportunities for recognition and compensation, including supporting those post-basic credentials of infant, toddler, and inclusive education that are so essential to families, kids, and communities. So both looking at that medium term on delivering a wage grid as part of our 10-year plan, and looking at those interim pieces to support the ECEs that you represent and that are part of your organization, because they are at the heart of childcare in BC. Thanks, Emily. Oh, sorry.
No, just before you do, like, you're welcome to stay, or, but I forgot to mention, you know, I mean, for so many years we were told we couldn't afford childcare in this province, and like now it is so obvious we can't afford not to have childcare. Our recovery post-pandemic was led by women returning to work. We had the highest number of women returning to work post-pandemic of any province. Women's wages growing faster here than any other province in Canada. And we know where childcare disproportionately falls still on women. And so when we see that our province's economic recovery was, I believe, directly connected to the childcare initiatives and the work of childcare providers, it becomes so clear what was always a rallying cry around childcare to make it to be like, this is an economic strategy. This is part of the province's success, is to have a good childcare system. This is not a social program. This is an economic program. It's like we're demonstrating that that's true in British Columbia through this. So I think that's why, you know, other provinces are looking to us and seeing that success. So thanks again for your advocacy on this.
Did we have Greg Hind come up? Oh, hi, Greg. Oh, there you are. Come on up. And then after that, we'll have Charlene Law, and then I'll see who's next to my.
A question on my phone.
Okay, great.
My question to the Premier. People on PWD get $1,358.42 a month on PWD. My question, when is it going to go up to $1,758.42? And the other question I have is BC Housing. What is the plan to build more BC housing in Langford, where I live?
Thanks very much, Greg. Great question, and nice to meet you earlier It's good to see you. Two really important questions. On the first question, government has increased disability support in our province 3 times since being elected. And in this most recent budget, we increased the shelter portion by $125. This is the first time, inexcusable, the first time it's been increased since 2007. The other piece that was in this budget is we increased the earning allowance for people who are able to work, so you can earn money. And it's not just that we're increasing the earning allowance, but we have $500 million in our Future Ready Skills program, and a portion of that is dedicated to supporting people with disabilities in working. So ensuring that there's accommodation available and supports available so that they can do training and they can connect with employers to be able to take advantage of earning that money at a workplace. And so we will continue to make sure and to ensure that people living on disability have enough income to live on. And I thank you for raising that really important issue. On BC Housing in Langford, I apologize, I don't know off the top of my head the various projects that are underway in Langford, but I'll find out for you, Greg. But broadly, we have 17,000 units of housing that are under construction or in development across the province. It takes way too long to build these units, way too long. So there's a building in my community, right on the edge of my community between mine and George Heyman. He's my neighbor MLA. A beautiful building, 100 units for people desperate for housing. We funded that building 2 years ago. It's still not under construction. In fact, it's now been subject to not one, but 2 different lawsuits to prevent the construction from going ahead. The City of Vancouver did a couple weeks of public hearings on it. BC Housing did 3 weeks of engagement with the community, changed the design of the building to respond to concerns from the community, and now it's in court, and we had to pass a special law at the province saying that it was okay to go ahead and build this building. And if that's what we have to do for buildings across the province, we're never going to be able to address homelessness or people who are desperately in need of housing. We have to build housing quickly. So whether it's in my home community, in your home community, that's the work we're doing with cities to make sure that we're building the housing that people need, including subsidized units. So thanks so much, Greg, for your question, and thanks for coming up. Nice to see you.
We have Charlene Law. We have time for one more question. I thought I was going to slip in another one there. I have a stack of questions here that cover some of the challenges that we've talked about here: housing, affordability, access to family doctors, and beyond. I want to let folks know that if you gave us one of these with your contact information on it, we're going to connect with the relevant ministry offices and ministers and look to get back to you, because there's lots here, really important questions and issues in our community.
Worried I spoke for too long. Look at that stack of questions. I'm sorry, everybody who sent in a sheet. We'll get answers back to you.
Hi, I'm Charlene. I'm the Executive Director of the Umbrella Society. We work with addictions, mostly recovery-oriented, and my question, although I had indicated I wanted Grace to ask it, I'm fine. It's fine. It's fine. I figured you owe me one, Grace. I wanted to ask about recovery housing. Last year, I lost my brother to alcoholism because of the lack of services and supports out there for him. And we run 3 recovery houses and see huge levels of success. And I don't see any investment from this government in more recovery housing.
Thanks. And first of all, I mean, God, I can't imagine what it's like to lose a family member to the toxic drug crisis or to addiction generally. I think about all the dumb decisions I made as a kid and friends around me, and I worry about my own kids in high school and the decisions, or even grade school, and the decisions that they might make in a moment with friends and change our family forever. It's such a horrific crisis. And your focus on recovery and treatment of addiction is one that I share. I believe very strongly that we need to give people a chance at recovery, and as a key pillar of our response to this crisis. Our government, since being elected, has been working on putting that system in place, but I think we need to really dramatically accelerate our work especially given the scale of the human carnage of the toxic drug crisis right now. The minister was visiting, or is visiting today, Minister Jennifer Whiteside, a facility with people. We often hear about the people who die, but a lot of people survive overdose with serious brain injury. It's a facility just full of people with serious brain injuries who are unable to care for themselves now. And so I mentioned it earlier, but we have $1 billion in the budget to expand options and opportunities for people in recovery. We have a system, and it's a really strange system in the province where there are recovery houses of remarkably varying quality. You know, some are just really a big problem in community, and they are not successful, and they don't support people, and they cause big headaches. And others are just very successful. They're models of what we need to be doing. And so some of that work is around ensuring that we're supporting the kind of recovery centers that are producing results that are a benefit to our community. And some of it is about building out some of the healthcare level supports that are well beyond community level recovery houses. So that work is underway right now. And I'm sure Umbrella will be a part of that work. And I'll ask the minister to reach out to you, and certainly I will as well, to see what opportunities you've got. Because of the scale of the crisis, I've asked the minister and her team to be very opportunistic. Anywhere we can open beds that are high quality, where there's staffing available and opportunities, let's do it to make sure that we're responding to the crisis quickly to support, you know, families like yours. Thanks so much for asking.
Thank you, everybody, for your time today, for your thoughtful questions, and looking around this room for the work that you do in communities on the South Island and beyond every single day. The success of what we can do as government really depends on the expertise and the everyday work of you folks in childcare, in housing, in mental health, in healthcare and beyond. You want to wrap us up, Premier?
Sure, yeah, thanks for spending the time with us this afternoon. Thanks to our hosts at Camosun for having us here today, and really appreciate the thoughtful questions, and my apologies again for being so long-winded in some of those answers, but they're such important issues, and we'll get back to those of you that we couldn't get to your questions with responses, and thanks again for making the time. I look forward to seeing you again.
If you wrote a question and didn't leave an email address or contact, come see us and we'll make sure that we've got that so we can get back to you. Thank you again, everyone.